This episode of the Cult Popture podcast was brought to you by our Patreon. If you want to tell us which films we should watch, listen to up to 2 extra exclusive podcasts a month, or give us something to discuss in our new post-credit scenes at the end of each episode, then please consider joining the cult and donating at www.patreon.com/cultpopture. Vocal exercises. We do vocal exercises before every podcast, don't we, Richard?
Hi everyone, I'm Vocal Exercises, and this is AJ.
Thank you, vocal exercises. God, there was a shit response to your joke. But I'm here. I'm keeping it in. And yes, my name is AJ, and this over here is Richard. And you are listening to Film Franchise Fortnights on the Cult Popture podcast, where every fortnight we review a different film franchise. And for the last 3 weeks, or 3 fortnights, we've been reviewing the James Bond series.
Now, AJ, why are we doing that? When... Who gets to be the one to talk about it first? AJ, why are we doing James Bond if No Time to Die doesn't come out till November?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Richard, because it was originally going to come out in 3 weeks from now, and this is a devastating setback. This has ruined the podcast.
I mean, to be fair, if it came out in 3 weeks, that would fuck it up as well.
3 fortnights, I should say.
Wait.
No.
3 weeks. Whatever.
It is 3 weeks. What are you talking about?
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Asshole.
Hey, shut up, man. Hey, fuck you.
Fuck you.
And so if you didn't hear, because of coronavirus, more like my boner virus, the No Time to Die has been pushed back. The latest James Bond movie, and it was this, Richard, the stars had aligned, you know. We were doing arguably our 100th franchise. We worked it out so that we could do all James Bond across 5 episodes, and it would time it perfectly so that the Daniel Craig episode would come out just after No Time to Die. And I don't know what to do now. Like, we just keep going. You've just got to keep going.
I mean, we'll finish the... Okay, I think what our plan is, we've briefly discussed this, is next fortnight will be an episode about Pierce Brosnan's time as everybody's favourite spy. And then we'll be, in the following fortnight, we'll cover Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, and Spectre. And then come November, we will do a film franchise follow-ups episode that will be put on the main channel. Is that correct?
Instead of just the Patreon.
Yeah, and so it's
because it's the finishing off of this episode. And look, it's not like there isn't precedent for this, because halfway through us doing the MCU, Kevin Feige clarified that Spider-Man Far From Home was set in Phase 3, but at least we got to end on Endgame with that.
It has end in the title.
It has end in the title. And this is just like... People have been suggesting, like, oh, what if you just do a Bond-themed year of the podcast? So it's relevant all year round.
Yeah, when we've already watched, like, 17 of the films, and we're, like, needed to very quickly decelerate.
Yeah. No, and look, I think that if this news had come out a fortnight earlier, like if this came out after the Sean Connery episode that they'd pushed No Time to Die back, I think it could have been cool to push back the Roger Moore episode and do, like, every 2 months we do a James Bond film franchise Fortnights.
Yeah.
But because we did 2 and then it came out, it's like, well, what's the fucking
and
point
the fact
of
that those 2 constitute, like, more than half of the franchise.
That's true. So, look, I'm frustrated, you're frustrated, Sony Pictures is frustrated.
The world is frustrated.
And the worst part is...
with coronavirus.
The worst part is that coronavirus, at the time of recording, is actually relatively capped in New Zealand currently, meaning that there's no reason why we won't get we shouldn't get No Time to Die. And to clarify, we're not getting it because it's being delayed because they don't think people are coming to the theater. The movie is not pro-coronavirus or anything like that. So despite all that, we're trekking on, and it's just, I don't know, I'm just disappointed, you know. It was nice to have this neat little package of an episode to tie into the new movie. But what are we going to do?
Oh, well, we've
Not
just outlined our plan.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's just continue on through this episode then. So this week we are, despite our devastating setback, we are looking at the 2 films in the Timothy Dalton era of Bond. So this is the second shortest run behind George Lazenby, who only did 1.
More like George Lazy.
More like you only live once as George Lazenby. Roger Moore, who played James Bond for the previous 7 movies before the first Timothy Dalton one, was reportedly free to leave from the role and not asked to leave, according to producer Albert Broccoli. I feel like people forget that there's a man named Broccoli behind the Bond series, and I've just got to constantly be
Broccoli.
like... Now it's yeah, that's true. It's his daughter. He didn't transition.
Imagine if that sounds like a Bond title.
What?
A man named Broccoli.
A man named Broccoli. Yeah. Well, it would be a good documentary about Bond.
It would be.
So apparently, so Roger Moore was free to leave. He wanted to leave. He wasn't fired apparently, and in the race to cast a new James Bond, which Timothy Dalton was already in,
He won the race.
Well, yeah, but he was in the conversation for years before Roger Moore even finished his run, much in the way people talk of Idris Elba these days, replacing Daniel Craig.
That he was actually in the running before Roger Moore started his run.
There is some anecdotal reports of that. So the other 2 actors who were in contention were Pierce Brosnan, who did take up the role, as we talked about before, after Dalton, and Sam Neill, New Zealand actor Sam Neill, who was the favourite of all the producers except Albert Broccoli. So they didn't go into it, but we will go into it later on in the show. Just wanted to mention that up top as a bit of a taster. So while Timothy Dalton's films tend to be like the least discussed in the series, nowadays when people talk about him and Bond, they tend to comment on how he almost seems like a test run for the reluctant, darker, more tragically, kind of Daniel Craig version, and who is apparently more book accurate. Apparently, the Ian Fleming's novel James Bond was a dark, foreboding character, much in the way Daniel Craig and to some degree Timothy Dalton was. So, The Living Daylights, which is the first film in his 2-film run, was actually originally intended to be a prequel as well to the other movies, which is something we wouldn't really see until Casino Royale. And even then, it's like, is this a prequel or is this a reboot? Because The Living Daylights was actually originally going to end with him getting his Dr. No mission. So, like a full-on actual prequel to the main continuity.
And then you make a second one and they're like, oh, fuck.
Yeah. I bet that's why they abandoned that idea.
Yeah.
How the hell do we do that?
His first film takes place just before Dr. No, and his second one takes place just after View to a Kill.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the first film, as I mentioned, was The Living Daylights. This came out in 1987, was directed by John Glenn, who did A View to a Kill and I think a couple of the others. What do you think this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
69.
It's got 72, so pretty close. I think there is a comfortable plateau with which the Timothy Dalton movies sit in terms of quality for me. I don't find them as unwatchable as some of the Sean Connery ones, but I don't get as excited about them. And so I think 72 is probably an accurate score. Yeah. So what is The Living Daylights about? So
The Living Daylights is about a defecting KGB agent officer who Bond helps, and he's supposed to take down this KGB sniper who's a cellist,
Mhm.
Kara, and he finds her too sexy, and so he doesn't kill her. And then they end up like teaming up, and then it all ends up in Afghanistan, and there's the
Yeah.
Mujahideen, and yeah,
Mm.
what else happened?
Yeah, well, essentially, he helps this KGB officer defect to Britain, but then the KGB officer gets captured again. And it turns out he's a double agent that was trying to infiltrate, like play both sides against each other, basically.
Yeah.
And so Bond and Kara, who's the KGB's girlfriend, not the entire organization, just that one officer, they have to track him down while also like trying to make him think he's not onto them. So it's a bit of conning back and forth. I mean, it's it's good. It's followable. It's not as confusing as it sounds. But so this was the last film to use an original Ian Fleming story title until Casino Royale in 2006, which is pretty interesting. And it is partially based on the short story from Fleming's Octopussy and the Living Daylights anthology. So Timothy Dalton was... Do you say Dalton or Dalton?
Dalton.
Timothy Dalton was selected to play Bond almost because he was the last choice left, because he had publicly stated his disinterest in the role, and it got pretty close to it being Pierce Brosnan, with NBC ready to and willing to uncancel Brosnan's TV show Remington Steele should he win the role, because they were like, if he becomes James Bond, everyone will want to watch Remington Steele. But that ended up being the reason they didn't go with him, because Broccoli didn't want Bond to be played by like a contemporary TV actor.
Yeah.
And so they essentially begged Dalton to do it, and he joined it. So yeah, what did you think of The Living Daylights?
It's cool. I mean, it's always fun and exciting when a new actor takes on the role and trying to sort of figure out their nuances and the things they bring to the role. There's things about his specific portrayal, which I'm sure we'll get to when we discuss that specifically. But other than that, yeah, it's cool. I like seeing like the Afghanistan stuff. Yeah, like it was cool. It's a new location, you know. It's again, like we've spoken about this plenty of times, but like you've got like the Russia one and the underwater one, and it's cool to have like I like when the specific location geographically is that exciting thing. That thing that you can pin it down as. I mean, it's not the most important thing about it.
No.
Like I would say the relationship with Kara is like the takeaway from this for me anyway.
Yeah.
But the Afghanistan stuff is what when I think back to this film, other than him deliberately missing the shot to kill Kara, that's the one that helps me, you know, in my mind be like, okay, where does the film go? That's right, it's got that, you know, that's something you can really cling to. Whereas other ones are like, oh, it's got there's this scene and this one. You know?
Yeah, because it's interesting you bring it up that it's the Afghanistan one, because I actually feel that tonally, The Living Daylights aligns more with the films of the series that you and I have previously derided as lacking any flavor or frills or any of the special things like From Russia with Love or For Your Eyes Only. But I think The Living Daylights kind of represents the transition where Bond films go from being like they go from being the mission, like the mission is more interesting than this time he's underwater or this time there's voodoo.
Yeah.
Like I would hate if No Time to Die ended up being this time Bond goes subterranean, you know, or does like a Prince and the Pauper story and he switches places with a evil Daniel Craig.
Well, it's got the female Daniel Craig in it. They're doing the female 007.
That's true. Because at some point, the Bond movies became that the less frilly and themed they were, the better they were. And I think The Living Daylights is that first transition to that, where I just enjoy it as a Bond film and not as a different kind of Bond film.
Sure,
you know?
yeah.
And I also thought that that The Living Daylights marks the crossover in my enjoyment of more complex Bond films. Like I go from something like Octopussy, which is I'm not 100% following this and I'm not enjoying it, to something like The Living Daylights, which is I'm not 100% following this, but I am enjoying it, which is how I receive all the Daniel Craig movies as well.
Yeah.
If you ask me what's Casino Royale about, that's one of my favorite movies. Probably couldn't tell you what it's about. Not in any succinct way. Not in like a grit, like getting down and into the actual meat of the plot. I don't really know what it's about, but I enjoy it a lot. And this sort of felt like this because and as I said, it is followable. But there are times when I don't know, he's chasing someone, and I was just like, I don't know who this is, but it's a cool chase scene, you know. It almost feels a bit Indiana Jones, in its style, and I wonder if that is sort of like how Moonraker was a Star Wars copy. Yeah. So do you have anything specific you wanted to bring up about The Living Daylights?
Nothing specific. Oh, I like that it doesn't. It shakes the formula a little bit. There's a very clear like this is the one of the most defined relationships between Bond and Bond girl that we've ever seen.
Do you want to go into that a bit more, because you've mentioned that a couple times?
No.
No? Okay, cool. See you, everybody.
All right,
bye.
license to go. No, I mean, it's just like they spend a lot more time together than I think a lot of the other ones, and where their relationship starts and where it ends, and that because what was the formula you mentioned, that he like has to bed 3 women, one's an ally, one's another spy, and one's a villain or something.
Yeah, and the villain and the ally. The villain, 2 of them have to be allies, and one of them's a villain, I think. And both a villain and an ally die, and one of the remaining ally lives. I don't know, it was fucking awful.
Yeah.
It was gross. This was the Bond girl formula that the broccoli and Saltzman duo had instilled back in the early days.
Yeah, and because Kara survives the entire film, right?
Yeah, and
does he beat anyone else in the film? I can't remember.
I don't think so.
No,
no,
because he spends most of his time with her.
Yeah, and it's not the first like slightly more complex relationship we've seen him have in the series, but I think it is the one I found myself liking the most. I looked at something like The Spy Who Loved Me with Agent XXX and how she's like his equal in a way.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is cool that they're equal, but at the same time, it's also a cool dynamic to see Bond like taking someone through an adventure who's relatively inexperienced with all of this, but is still like,
well, because it's an audience surrogate as well. It's a classic story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you're right, and it is so different from like A View to a Kill, like coming right off A View to a Kill. This could not be I guess it could be a more different one, but like
it could not be a James Bond film. Imagine that.
That would be more different. I don't know. It seems like this is the first time in the series that they really took it seriously in a weird way.
Yeah.
Like they wanted it to be dark. Yeah. And I think one thing that I'd like to sort of point out about Timothy Dalton as well, that again feels almost like a precursor to the Daniel Craig darkness that we're all expected to see, or that we're all used to seeing by now, and that's that it's like they intentionally this happens in both films, so this can be our transition through to License to Kill, but it feels like they set up a scenario where Sean Connery or Roger Moore would have made a pun, and then Timothy Dalton just says something real literal.
Yeah.
He doesn't say there is one pun in the whole series, and it's the end of The Living Daylights where he kicks the bad guy off a plane who's holding onto his boot, and he unties his shoelaces, and the bad guy falls to his death. And when Kara asks what happened to him, and he goes, "He got the boot." And I was like, interesting, because they never do this again in the rest of the series. Something ripe for punning will happen, and he'll just be like, "Yeah, I guess that's how it goes." Actually, I lie. In the one time he does the one time in License to Kill that he does make a pun, it doesn't land at all, which is when they find a guy impaled on a forklift, and he says, "I guess he reached a dead end," and it's like, a dead end is specific enough to dying by being impaled on a forklift, you know. Maybe that's why. Maybe he's insecure about his puns is the main trait of Timothy Dalton's Bond. You know, they're like, oh, Sean Connery's like the suave and cheeky dude, and Roger Moore is the classic comical, witty gentleman spy. And look, Timothy Dalton's just a bit insecure. Like he's not as confident. He can't make as good puns.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's move on very quickly to the second film and the last film that Timothy Dalton starred in, and that is License to Kill, which came out in 1989. This is going to be a pretty short episode, I think. We do have other stuff to talk about. It's not just going to be these two movies. I've made this, because there is less movies to talk about, I've also made this partially like the general, you know, when you take the lid off the James Bond series as a culture, what do you find? So we'll talk about License to Kill, and then we'll talk about a lot more broad Bond stuff. So, License to Kill, 1989, also directed by John Glenn, which surprised me because this one reeks of like a new director came on board and picked up the project and tried to do something different with it. But no, it's just John Glenn, the guy who's done a bunch of these already. And what do you think this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
69.
76.
Wow.
So a bit higher than the Living Daylights. What is this movie about?
So this is like the big one. The big thing about this one, obviously, is that his license to kill gets revoked, which is essentially like one part of him kind of being disavowed or you know, thrown out of MI6. Which happens. This is the first time it's happened in the series, right?
I think it's the first time he goes rogue.
Yeah, but it
something
happens,
that is now criticized because he does it so much.
Yeah, exactly. Because like every Craig movie almost does it, right? Like,
I don't think he goes. I think in Quantum of Solace he just is rogue.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I know in
right.
Skyfall, I definitely remember the like revoking, or is that Inspector?
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think he goes rogue in all of them.
Yeah. Well, it's like in Mission Impossible, how, you know, the second film is the only one where he just does a mission.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
so this is...
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, yeah, and this is a whole, like, buddy adventure with Felix. Well, not really, but it's like he's a huge part of it, even though he's kind of been, like, not a background character, but, like...
I don't know if we've actually mentioned Felix.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like...
he's like the American James Bond who shows up occasionally.
Yeah.
He's played by Jeffrey Wright in Casino Royale and No Time to Die, so you might recognize him from that.
Yeah, but he's he's in quite a few of the films.
Yeah, played by different actors, yeah.
Yeah, but this is the first time that he's really thrust into the spotlight.
So why does James Bond get his license to kill revoked, though, Richard?
Felix gets hurt in the line of duty, mortally wounded, and his wife gets killed, right?
Yeah, and he gets his leg bitten off by a shark.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. From drug lord Franz Sanchez.
Like pick a nationality.
Yeah.
And so Bond is like, I'm gonna fucking go after him, and M says no. And then he goes, well, I'm going to do it anyway. And M goes, well, you can't kill anyone.
Yeah, it's Bond it's this time it's personal. You know, he's taking revenge because Felix's wife was murdered and Felix lost a leg. So this was the first film in the series to not use the title of an Ian Fleming story, though it is partially based on Live and Let Die, the novel, and the short story, The Hildebrand Rarity, which I also mentioned in that video that I keep talking about that maybe people know exists or not, where I talked about all the different James Bond story titles yet to be adapted to film. And this was the fifth and final consecutive Bond film to be directed by John Glenn. So he actually did... Shit, okay. I forgot I wrote that.
You had it in your own notes.
Yeah, yeah. As well as the last of feature actors Robert Brown as M and Caroline Bliss as Miss Moneypenny, and the final Bond film to utilize the services of screenwriter Richard Marabom, title designer Maurice Binder, and producer Albert R. Broccoli.
Is there a man whose last name is Broccoli?
This is his last film. I didn't realize that. So Maribom, the writer and the title designer Binder, they died in 1991, and Broccoli died in 1996. But he had like throat surgery or something during after this film, and because of a whole bunch of other shit, which delayed the release of GoldenEye, which we will talk about in the Pierce Brosnan episode. I was going to put it here, but it seemed more tied to GoldenEye.
We've got too much content with these two films.
Yeah, that's a good point. I probably should have put it in this one. But this is the end of an era, dude. Barbara Broccoli, who's Albert Broccoli's daughter, was already acting as a producer on here. Right. But I think this marks a moment in our journey through James Bond where this is where the people who started it are dying. They're dying of old age. That's how long it's been going.
Yeah, it is also worth that you mentioned about the delay. Is that coming up to this? Where we're after License to Kill is the longest gap between Bond films to date.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, 6 years. Yeah. Just beating out the gap between Spectre and No Time to Die, which is 5 years.
There you go. So License to Kill was originally titled License Revoked, in line with the plot. The name was changed in post-production due to American test screenings associating the term with driving.
Yeah, fair enough. License to Kill is just a bit more provocative. License Revoked it just reminds me of Lethal Weapon. It's just been revoked.
Yeah, me too.
I don't know. Revoked isn't necessarily a badass word, but kill is.
Yeah. And if, as we said before, there was a big delay between this and GoldenEye, and there was thought that maybe this would be the last one. And you know what? It's not a terrible one to go out on. It has a lot of finalistic elements in it.
Yeah.
It does feel like the final, it's because it's the first one where he goes rogue, and it's got the I was about to say the death of a main supporting character, but he doesn't actually die. But I don't know. A lot of this just feels like if you were going to end James Bond once and for all, this isn't a bad way to do it.
It's the Civil War of the franchise. It's the one that you're you could end on it, but there's presumably a bigger ending coming down the track, and it features a main character who you're supposed to care about, but you don't really, getting injured in some way, but not dying.
What are you talking about? I need to... So Felix Leiter.
And Rhodey in Civil War. You expect, they're going to do a big death of this kind of side character, the most important character you could feasibly kill off without changing anything. But instead they just maim him.
Yeah. So, License to Kill is also partially, apparently, based on Kurosawa's Yojimbo, which is the second film we've covered on film franchise Fortnights to be an unofficial remake of Yojimbo after A Fistful of Dollars from the Man with No Name trilogy.
I did not notice similarities between this and A Fistful of Dollars.
yeah, because I could not read that movie at all.
Yeah, that was a tough one.
What did you think of this film? License to Kill, one of the most divisive films in the series.
How do you feel about it?
I liked the second half a lot more than the first half.
Interesting,
and I can say
because I hate the second half, but I love the first half.
Wow! No, because I actually watched this in two halves because I was watching it late at night and had to go to bed, and so I didn't see the second half until a day later. And the first half, I was like, it starts with Bond going to Felix's wedding, and they get distracted and go on a mission, and I was just like, this is stupid. The less I see about Bond's days off, the better. I don't want to know what Bond does in his personal time. This is imagine it starts, he's just watching TV and drinking a beer. It's this is kind of weird to see him out of the office.
Well, it'd be weird to see him drinking a beer before Skyfall as well, because that's the first time it happened.
Oh, very cool.
Fun fact.
And I think it's so different from the previous films, to the point as well where it barely feels like a Bond movie at all. It feels like a it feels like a late 80s action movie. It feels like
Yeah.
Lethal Weapon a lot more than James Bond. But then again, what is a James Bond movie? Like, they've tonally have changed so much over the years that maybe that's a meaningless statement. And I think it's funny how Dalton's two films seem to be such extreme versions of what is now like the main type of film going, or the two main types going forward. There's either the by the book spy film, which is what The Living Daylights is, or the kick it to the curb subversion. You had these expectations, well, not anymore. Like all of all of Pierce Brosnan ones are the by the books one, and like all of Daniel Craig's are, except for Spectre, are trying to be memorable and significant.
Yeah.
So it's pretty funny that it kind of represents the future in a lot of ways for the series. But yeah, I liked the second half a lot more when I came back to finish watching it last night, which was actually for the first time in film franchise Fortnights behind the scenes history. It was the first time I had written up most of the research before finishing a film.
Wow.
Because I didn't have time to do it the other way. I got to finish it after I do all the research. But I did, of course, go back and add any extra thoughts that I had after seeing the second half, which I just thought was more interesting and compelling and action-packed and more typical of a Bond film, which perplexingly is also one of my least favorite things about it, is when it strays into the formula. So I don't know what I'm talking about. What do you think of it?
Yeah, it's cool. I get what you mean about how it is like it kind of devolves into just like your typical 80s action fare, which I think like A View to a Kill did better. And just like A View to a Kill to me is the 80s James Bond film. And so License to Kill, yeah, it's funny, and I guess we'll get into this more when we talk about like our general thoughts of Timothy Dalton, but like just the kind of how well he represents the decade, and it doesn't kind of fit into what you think of when you think of the 80s, whereas like the Octopussy and View to a Kill feel a lot more 80s to me.
Yeah. Well, this feels like your dark. Like, this is, you know what? License to Kill is a fucking 1989 film.
It's on the cusp of change.
Yeah. It's because Batman was another 1989 film.
Yeah,
and they feel
100%.
very similar, right?
Good point.
And not that's a weird thing to say without kind of backing it up. They're very different in terms of story. I don't know how to describe this. Just tonally, not even tonally. I don't know. They just look similar. They just feel similar.
Yeah, well, because
I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Most of this one's set in Gotham as well.
It is actually the only Bond film to not take any place in Britain at any point.
Oh, interesting.
But
most of it's in Gotham.
I think because the 90s are very distinct for this kind of movie. The 90s were these dark crime action dramas like Mel Gibson Payback and stuff and things like that, whereas because Brosnan was so late into the 90s, it almost feels like that chunk of film history is missing from James Bond, and this is the closest we have to that.
Yeah.
Because it was 1989. So the script for this film was finished so late in the day that actress Carrie Lowell, who plays Pam Bouvier, the Bond girl in the film, she was asked to audition with lines from A View to a Kill because they hadn't finished the actual License to Kill movie.
Wow.
And if that doesn't speak to the lazy, interchangeable nature of how these movies wrote women, I don't know what does. Like, just read the lines from another completely different character, and we'll be able to tell if you're right for the part or not. So yeah, that's pretty, and it does. This does feel like not the final draft. I think that's the best way to describe License to Kill and why it feels so different, is it doesn't feel like it's finished, the script. Yeah.
Just the name Carrie Lowell, I saw it in the credits and it stuck out to me and I couldn't figure out why, but there's a Sufjan Stevens has an album called Carrie and Lowell.
Oh, weird. I think that's her full name. So
yeah, it's the name. It's his parents' name.
Oh, is Carrie Lowell his mum?
Yeah, Carrie's his mum, and Lowell's his dad.
What?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
So Sufjan Stevens, the artist who famously
Yes.
did the music for
Yep, I know who he is.
Call Me by Your Name. His mum's name is Carrie, and her second husband's name is Lowell. And so he's got an album called Carrie and Lowell.
So this is just a coincidence.
Yeah, but to be fair, her name is spelled Carrie, and she and Carrie Lowell of A View to a Kill, no, License to Kill fame is Carrie, Carey.
What kind of a name is Lowell? Oh, well, anyway. What a strange detour to take us on, but
Yeah.
I welcome it in this rather brief. So this is probably the most interesting thing about License to Kill, is this is the first and only Bond to have received a restricted rating.
Interesting.
I think this was R15 maybe. I'm not sure what the rating system is like in other countries, but it's not hard to see why. This is considerably more gory than previous or future entries. You see, as I said, you see a guy get his leg bitten off by a shark. You see a very young Benicio del Toro gets lowered into like a grinder, which is very grim and very dark. And probably the funniest thing, which I wish was the picture I took for the Instagram, but I uploaded the picture to the Instagram before I got to this point in the movie. They put a guy in like a giant microwave.
It's like a pressure chamber.
And his head grows to the size of the window, and then it explodes, and it's very silly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because it's such a horrific image, but it just looks funny.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Richard, I'm going to briefly take a turn into problematic corner, which is diminishing returns, which is a good thing. From the Sean Connery, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton episodes, there's not, there was more stuff to talk about in the Sean Connery episode.
Yeah.
And Dalton's Bond is even less problematic than Roger Moore, though the darker tone of the two movies do mean he's a bit more rough with his female adversaries. Like in The Living Daylights, he like strips the shirt off a woman so that her naked body will distract an enemy, which is a bit uncomfortable. And at one point, he thinks Pam, Carrie Lowell, is betraying him, and so he like pushes her onto a bed and holds her down to like be like, "What are you hiding?" kind of thing.
Yeah, and thrusts a hand between her legs.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Because he's grabbing. She's got a small gun and like a garter belt.
Right.
But it looks like, Jesus
that's
Christ.
Essential information.
Yeah.
yeah. That's essential information to understanding what happens there. I would say that really the only problem here, and it's here through to the Brosnan era, and this is not, I don't know if this is problematic. If it is, let me know. The love stories just feel so insincere from License to Kill onwards. Like, they get in the way. Like, Pam Bouvier, when she first meets Bond in License to Kill, she's like barely his friend, and then they grab a boat together and they're boating away into the distance, and they just bang because, of course,
they're on a boat,
and it feels just less real. It doesn't feel authentic to the characters, which is something you can say about. You could probably say it about plenty of the previous Bond movies as well. But like that carries on through the Brosnan era. Now that I'm thinking about it, that was one of my main criticisms of Spectre, was that the Daniel Craig movie, was that the love story was super inorganic and didn't feel authentic.
Yeah. But hey,
and it just makes
you've got another movie to see how it goes.
Yeah. I guess just Pam Bouvier feels like quite a strong female character. But when they do things like this, it just makes her feel cheap and cardboard. And like there's like a love triangle between the bad guy's girlfriend and Bond and Pam Bouvier, and it's just it just didn't seem real, I guess. But that's fucking not problematic. To be honest, the most problematic thing in the Timothy Dalton films is that there's a group of Asian businessmen in License to Kill who are constantly referred to as the Orientals. They're like, but the Orientals all the time. Yeah, so contemporary reviews for License to Kill were quite harsh on the film. But the retrospectives range from "it's still pretty bad" to "this is the best one." So pretty extreme. But similar to how you feel about Pacific Rim, I find it strange that this film is fine to me. Like, it's like, whatever. Even though it's at the same time it's so disruptive and attempts to be different, which usually I welcome in a franchise. This one just isn't different enough, I guess. Do you have any more thoughts on License to Kill?
No, but I'm keen to talk about this era of Bond as a whole.
Cool. Okay. Well, let's do that, Richard. What did you think of Timothy Dalton as James Bond?
Okay. Timothy Dalton is a weird one for me watching as Bond because he's the only actor that I don't immediately associate with being James Bond. Sure, Sean Connery played other roles, Roger Moore, Daniel Craig, Pierce Brosnan. They all played other roles, but Timothy Dalton is the only one that I know more from like Hot Fuzz and Toy Story 3 and 4, you know? And and then I think just talking to people of various ages, I don't think that's necessarily specific to me. And in the way that Daniel Craig feels like my Bond and like my parents, I'm sure Sean Connery feels like their Bond. My boss at work, I was talking to him about the movies, and he was saying Roger Moore is his Bond. I think Timothy Dalton is nobody's Bond.
He's nobody's Bond. That's the title of the podvid for the week.
Because, and let me explain why that is. It's not only because he did 2 films, because I'm sorry, I love you, George Lazenby. I love On Her Majesty's Secret Service. But obviously, like, he doesn't even feel like he's in the conversation and who gets to be somebody's Bond. Not because he did one film, but because Sean Connery took it back after him. So if you came of age in that era, Sean Connery's still your Bond.
Yeah.
Whereas, okay,
yeah,
so
George Lazenby doesn't have a podvid.
Yeah. If you came of age in the 60s, Sean Connery is your Bond. In the 70s, Roger Moore. In the 90s, Pierce Brosnan. In the 2000s or 2010s, Daniel Craig. However, I didn't mention the 80s because if you came of age in the 80s, like I said earlier, I think that A View to a Kill is like the most 80s Bond movie. And so if you grew up watching 80s movies and you grew up in the 80s and you consider that your defining era of film, I think that Octopussy and View to a Kill would be like your Bond movies that you grew up with, and so you would still consider Roger Moore to be your one. And so The Living Daylights and License to Kill, they exemplify that early 90s that wasn't really fully realized until maybe Pulp Fiction, that kind of era of film that's like has a little bit of fun from the 80s and is trying to be a bit more serious, but before going like full John Woo 90s kind of late Brosnan or something like the first or second Mission Impossible film. And so they kind of just float in the middle there and don't really feel like they belong to a specific generation. When Bond, for some reason, seems to feel like this thing that everyone has to talk about which one is theirs. I've never heard Timothy Dalton come up in that conversation.
Yeah. He's just invisible. You know, he didn't add enough to the table, or at least what he did add to the table was this darkness, which is just done better by Daniel Craig and more interestingly. So it's like the one thing he had that defined him is now more associated with a different actor who played him, and the same can't be said for any other Bond, not even George Lazenby, who still had his own distinct.
Yeah.
If George Lazenby had a podvid, what if all the Bonds were lined up like Spice Girls and there's like Sporty Bond and Nobody's Bond and Best Bond, what do you think George Lazenby's would be?
Underrated.
Underrated Bond.
Yeah.
Nice.
I
Yeah.
do want to just point
Nice.
out as well that I know people are going to be commenting on this and saying that they think Timothy Dalton's the best one or whatever. But I think that even if you... I'm yet to meet someone or to hear of someone, and I'm sure I'm going to we'll get heaps of comments of saying this, but like, even if you retroactively think he's the best or whatever, he's not. I don't think he's anyone's first image is conjured when they say the word Bond, you know? And that's potentially just because Timothy Dalton has had a great career post James Bond, and so I associate him more with those roles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I like that. That's good. That's a good it's a good thing to say. I was trying to think of a more eloquent way to put that, but I think that's an important way to look at it. And the conversation around Bond, which we continue to have each week. So, Richard, the thing about Timothy Dalton's Bond, though, is that in License to Kill, there is actually a reference to his failed marriage, and by failed I mean she was killed, which is still a failed marriage.
Sorry, widows, you failed. God, imagine being a new widow and hearing that on your favorite podcast. Oh my God, I'm sorry.
The obsession with which Bond pursues Sanchez on the behalf of Lyda and his dead wife is seen as being because of his own brutally cut short marriage.
This time it's personal.
Yeah, this time it's personal. So he's fighting for Felix Leiter because he also has a dead wife, so he knows how it feels. So this is the third time in the series in which George Lazenby's Bond's marriage to Teresa Bond or Tracy
failed
Bond,
marriage
is referenced. The other two being there's a brief line in The Spy Who Loved Me where Roger Moore acknowledges that he was married once, and then there's that horrible opening sequence in For Your Eyes Only where Bond visits Tracy's grave. And these three moments of referencing a previous actor's iteration of the character complicates a very popular fan theory regarding 007 and the actors who've played him. And this is what I thought was universally known as the many Bonds theory. It's not. I guess I called it that somewhere and
That's
just thought
so
that
weird.
was what
I've
it was
never
called.
heard that.
It's not really called anything.
I Bond is a code name.
Right, yeah, Bond is a code name. I googled the mini Bonds theory, and it was like, what do you? It was like a bunch of insurance ads came up.
Is this about covalent bonds? Like,
so the basic gist of the Bond as a code name theory is that Bond is but a code name given to the multiple men who have seen portray the character. It's a very easy fan theory to come up with. I think. I don't think it's much of a stretch, you know. And it kind of comes to you. Comes to everyone. It kind of ends up thinking about this at some point when watching the films. And if
you're listening to this and you didn't realize that yourself, you're fucking stupid, is what we're saying.
You probably had a failed marriage. This fan theory is used to allow for the series to have one unbroken canon timeline, as in real life, which is important to people, I guess, who care about continuity. The different Bonds have existed in different time periods, yet they all remain roughly the same age, and the different films also date themselves by mentioning contemporary events. It would also obviously explain why each Bond looks different, and why they all have pretty distinct personalities. So, while it's possible that both Lazenby, Moore, and Dalton are playing different men sharing a code name who were all once married, and in Lazenby and Moore's cases to a woman named Tracy, it certainly feels a lot more like we're intended to think of these actors as the same person with potential soft continuity reboots between actors.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, it is a fun theory, and I'm sure we'll talk about it when we get to it, but that like Skyfall is considered the definitive debunking of this theory.
Well, we can talk about that now.
Yeah.
I've written all this down as well.
But because essentially you see the graves of his parents, who both have the last name Bond, essentially confirming that the character we're seeing's actual name is James Bond.
Yeah.
Which they could still be different people. There's There's multiple Alexander Joneses.
Yeah, there are. There's only one Richard Martin, though.
Yeah.
It's the guy who directed Earbud too. So other things which kind of contribute to the many Bonds theory would be why Blofeld doesn't recognize George Lazenby's Bond on Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah.
And while this is getting a bit ahead of ourselves, which you already did just then, it would also explain how Judi Dench's portrayal of M begins in the Pierce Brosnan era, where she specifically refers to Bond as a Cold War relic, and then she continues to play the character in the Daniel Craig era, which is supposed to be a prequel. And in Casino Royale, she references 9/11. So if there's supposed to be one timeline, the existence of Judi Dench's M means the many Bonds theory is the only way this is possible, as even if you could argue that her version of the character was replaced by other actors who portrayed M from Connery onwards, and then she returned during the Brosnan era, we actually see Judi Dench's M replaced at the end of Skyfall with Ralph Fiennes' M. So no, that doesn't work either. It worked until Skyfall came out, then now it doesn't work anymore. So I guess the only possible workaround here would be that every Brosnan film takes place between Quantum of Solace and Skyfall.
I mean, like I said, it is a fun theory, and you can look as deep into it as you want, and you can talk about how all these things debunk it, but fuck it. I mean, the series is... the continuity of the series has jumped through so many hoops before. I mean, if they reveal in No Time to Die that it is a code name, I'm sure they'll fucking work it out, you know? It's not the most insane thing.
The James Bond wiki, because we love fucking wikis here on Cold Pop Show.
Yeah, we love to fuck wikis.
Never been to if you've never been to a wiki before, they're terribly written. And this is verbatim the evidence, the counter evidence against the many Bond theories that that I've coined it, that the website offers. Number one, Lazenby still has Connery era gadgets such as the watch. Okay. Moore visits the gravesite of Lazenby Bond's wife, Tracy Bond. Dalton's Bond is known by Felix Leiter to have an abrupt marriage. And again, this is verbatim. Brosnar's Bond references the death of his wife and The World Is Not Enough. I didn't remember that, so apparently that happens. If James Bond is a code name, why does Tracy have the last name Bond on her gravestone? It's a good one. If James Bond is a code name, Bart, why does Tracy have the last name of Bond on her gravestone? Very fun. All right. Moore was recognised by a friend of his Cambridge days, set way before Dr. No, and Dalton was still called James Bond after he went rogue, and they never set a replacement James Bond for him. So good points, I guess.
Yeah.
Richard, while we're speaking of many Bonds, let's talk about other actors who were actually considered for the role of Bond, both before Lazenby and after. I thought this would be, when else are we going to have time to discuss such an interesting piece of trivia about the series?
No time to discuss.
So let's just... No time to discuss it.
Well, we've got until fucking November to discuss it if we want.
So, as mentioned up the top of the episode, Sam Neill lost the role to Timothy Dalton, but you can actually find a screen test for Sam Neill as the character online. It's about 30 seconds of him with dark hair, being all suave, and it's very strange to see. Have you seen it?
The top comment on Reddit was like, and that's when the sex happens. Not from the Bond in front of you, but from the two other Bonds at the side.
Very good. Love it. This is so interesting to me. Sam Neill. We could have had a New Zealand Bond. Think about that. About that.
I mean, Sam Neill's great. Watching the screen test, though, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see why you didn't get it.
I feel like I really like Sam Neill, and I wouldn't want my image of him ruined by watching him be like a chauvinist.
Yeah.
You know, like it'd be such a bummer to see New Zealand's Tom Hanks be like real gross, and that he has similar roles, not that he has coronavirus. God, I hope Tom Hanks is okay. I hope Sam Neill is okay as well.
Fuck,
actually.
imagine if Tom Hanks dies between recording this and releasing
Well, I'll obviously cut this bit out if Tom Hanks' condition gets worse between now and releasing the episode. James Brolin, who's he was considered in 1983. He's the father of Josh Brolin and the husband of Barbara Streisand. But no, Barbara Streisand is not Josh Brolin's mum. Which is what I immediately looked up after reading that. He screen tested for Octopussy, but then Roger Moore returned to the role.
He would have been quite old at the time because he's like almost 80 now.
Oh, okay. I didn't actually recognize anything I've seen him in.
He's Jeff's dad in Community, and that same day, I think he was also Castle's dad in Castle.
The same day?
Yeah, the episodes came out on the same day.
Oh, right. Michael Caine was considered in 1967, but he didn't want to be typecast after starring in the Harry Palmer films, which is we talked about this on the Austin Powers episode, that there's like this whole other James Bond-esque franchise that Michael Caine did in the 60s called Harry Palmer.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I don't think Michael Caine would have been a very good James Bond.
And Harry Palmer's like officially what Austin Powers is parodying.
Right, that's right, yeah. I think that Michael Caine is too lower class to be James Bond. Like, he's Cockney, he's not...
Yeah. Oh, Michael
He's
Caine.
not the suaves. I'll have a martini, shaken, not stirred.
Yeah, I'm Michael Caine.
Let's not let...
The name's Caine.
Let's not
Michael
let this
Caine.
descend. Let's stop it. We can't. That's the lowest hanging fruit of accent of celebrity impressions. We're not doing it.
Hey, we got through last week's episode without doing a Christopher Walken impression.
That's true. That is true.
I think.
I'm
allowed to do a Michael Caine one. No.
Can you do this though? Dick.
I'm Christopher Walken.
We're in dark territory now. What timeline is this? But what timeline would this have been? Because also in 1967, Richard, Dick Van Dyke was briefly considered. Guess why he wasn't chosen?
Oh, wow. Because he's way too fucking old?
No. His accent's too bad. A famously bad English accent. Yeah. This was post Mary Poppins.
I'm Dick Van Dyke.
It sounds exactly like our Michael Caine impression.
I'm Dick Van Dyke. Hello. The name's Van Dyke. Dick Van Dyke.
The name's Doc. The name's Van Dyke. Dick Van Dyke. Anyway, Mel Gibson in 1987 was briefly considered. Can you imagine Mel Gibson as James Bond?
Hello, I'm Mel Gibson.
Stop it. This cannot be your take for every one of these. This is interesting podcast fodder, and you're just being silly with all of it.
People have been waiting weeks to hear this list.
You were ruining this for me. So MGM wanted him, but Broccoli only wanted to cast a British actor, which is interesting because George Lazenby is Australian, and so is Mel Gibson. So eat shit, Albert Broccoli. But that being said, I don't think Mel Gibson would have suited the role at all. The last three have been real, out of left field.
Well, I mean, he's problematic in real life.
But so Sean Connery. So maybe he would have been good.
True. Yeah.
In 1994, Sean Bean was considered. This was the second choice for Eon, which is the production company, if Timothy Dalton did not return. However, MGM overruled on both counts and Pierce Brosnan was given the part. The producers were still impressed and gave him the part of the villain in GoldenEye. And he was supposed to be like a direct parallel of Bond. He was actually called 006 in that film. As we mentioned this on the Roger Moore episode, Clint Eastwood, Michael Gambon, Burt Reynolds, and Adam West, they were all considered, but 3 of those 4 people aren't British, and apparently Michael Gambon wasn't fit enough. In 1994, Liam Neeson was considered to play Bond, but he said that his girlfriend threatened to not marry him if he took the role.
Well, I mean, that marriage failed anyway, didn't it?
Did it? Oh.
Yeah, his wife died.
Oh, no, this is too mean. It's a good joke.
Now, see, AJ, the thing is that that's a horrible thing to say. But in the context of the podcast, it was a very funny callback.
Yeah, I agree. And now I'm conflicted about it because do we keep it in? Do we cut it out? I guess you, the listener, will find out. Dominic West in 2005, he bowed out of running because he thought Brosnan was returning. And what?
Like, just the fact that he, like, lost out on playing James Bond, on being this generation's definitive James Bond, just because he saw a rumor that was like, okay, no, never mind. I guess I'm not getting it, and then just called up Barbara Broccoli and was like, "Oh yeah, no, thanks for having me, but yeah, no." Like,
I heard about Brosnan.
Yeah, all good.
And this next one is one of the more interesting ones for me because I've seen this name thrown around a lot to replace Daniel Craig. Apparently, in 2005, Henry Cavill was the preferred choice of Casino Royale director Martin Campbell, but he was considered too young, which is interesting because the whole point of Casino Royale is that he's younger.
Yeah, I've heard that many a time.
Well, I have not.
Because Henry Cavill's kind of known for missing out on roles, and then if he gets James Bond, it'll be funny because he missed out on Superman and James Bond in the same year, and then would go on to play both of them later potentially.
That's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool piece of trivia. But you know what? I've said this before. I think I don't like it when one actor plays two really iconic characters. Yeah,
well, and he's had his James Bond moment in Mission Impossible Fallout.
That's true. Yeah. Sam Worthington was also briefly considered, but lost to Daniel Craig. Clive Owen was also considered.
Nice,
Wikipedia says the reason that Clive Owen was not selected was the producers were unwilling to provide gross profit points. I don't know what that means.
I'm sure that'll be, when you get money on the back end kind of thing. Rather than getting a salary, you get a percentage of the gross.
Right.
That's Clive what I would assume it means.
Clive Owen would have been a good James Bond, potentially.
Yeah, I'm Clive Owen.
I'm Clive Owen.
I can imagine him saying it.
I'm Clive
Owen.
The classic James Bond.
Something in the morning to you.
And the last one I've got on this list is Doug Ray Scott. Was considered in 2005 history's unluckiest leading man next to Stuart Townsend, the guy who could have been Aragorn but ended up starring in a shitty vampire movie.
Eric Stoltz, mate.
Eric Stoltz could have been Marty McFly. So Doug Ray Scott, whose most well-known role is being the villain in the only bad Mission Impossible film, has missed out on both Wolverine and James Bond. So R.I.P. Doug Ray Scott.
He's an Aussie as well, isn't he?
I think he might be, yeah. And the last one I've got here is Timothy Dalton was offered the role in 1969, 1972, and 1979 before finally succumbing in 1987.
Doug Ray Scott's Scottish, sorry. It's there in the name.
You piece of shit.
All right. Titles, theme songs, I'm ready.
Which one do you want to do first?
Titles.
All right, well, we talk about titles a lot on this podcast, and I didn't change some of the stuff from the Roger Moore episode. So what do you think of the Roger Moore titles, Richard? That's what I've written down, because I just copied the notes. No. What do you think of the Timothy Dalton titles?
I quite like License to Kill as the first new title. It's a fun one, but it's like on Her Majesty's Secret Service. That could kind of apply to any of them because it's just a thing he has in all the films. Although I know that it's specific to this film because it's taken away from him.
I was quite conflicted because as from the last couple of weeks, I have categories for Bond titles, and License to Kill, I put in what you said, the broad titles you could give to literally any of the films in the series, where On Her Majesty's Secret Service, The Spy Who Loved Me, and For Your Eyes Only live. But I do get that it is also, like, in the category of it's just a name of a significant feature in it. But because you could call any of the films License to Kill, I put it in that category.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe it's a Venn diagram.
It is definitely specific to this film.
Yeah.
Now, The Living Daylights. The Living Daylights is is a good book title. It's one that I don't
Mhm.
know if it translates well to film. It's not an exciting thing to see. License to Kill, you see that chucked up on a movie poster, and you go, boy howdy, it's 1989 and I want to see that. Whereas The Living Daylights, especially to be the first, because you think about, like, okay, Doctor No's a weird fucking title, but like Live and Let Die, as you're like, oh shit, new James Bond movie, new actor, what a cool title. And then Living Daylights, you don't do that. Actually, it's kind of a nice pattern because GoldenEye fits that, and then Casino Royale's kind of just like, oh yeah, it's like, is this that movie with Kevin Spacey where he teaches kids how to play poker that came out around the same time?
Imagine getting that confused. The much more famous James Bond movie with the Kevin Spacey poker movie.
Yeah. The Jim Sturgis, Lawrence Fishburne, Kevin Spacey film. Yeah, I don't know. The Living Daylights is just not that exciting, and it was like just before it happened to the film, I was like, oh, because of the expression, like, scare the living daylights out of someone, which is just like, it's something your mum says.
Yeah, it is a title bomb. He does say, when referring to why he didn't shoot the main girl in the film when it looked like she was going to assassinate the KGB agent, he says, no, I didn't kill her, but I scared the living daylights out of her. But despite being a title bomb, I've still placed it in the category ominous phrases which don't really refer to anything specific in the film itself. Because beyond that line, like, the living daylights aren't a problem, like, whatever that phrase even means, the result of someone having the living daylight scared out of them is not like a common theme in the film. There's no MacGuffin that's called the living daylights. So, yeah. It's an ominous phrase which doesn't refer to anything specific. Cool.
Nice.
Well, Richard, then let's talk about theme songs, because every James Bond movie has a theme song with an opening sequence at the beginning of it, but the both Dalton movies get a little cocky with this formula and attempt to boast multiple theme songs. Both of them do this, and it does not work, and just makes this otherwise very neat, idiosyncratic feature of the series just seem kind of messy. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, now this one's just a haberdashery of songs. So the Living Daylights main song for the opening sequence is called The Living Daylights by Aha, who did Take On Me. And that I really like The Living Daylights by Aha. It sounds like Hungry Like the Wolf. It goes like, I'm going to just start singing. I was just about to start singing Hungry by the Wolf. It's like, because in my mind, it's the same thing as, I'm thinking Don't Fear the Reaper. It's like, come on, baby, don't fear the Reaper. It's got that kind of tonality to it. It's like,
right.
The living daylights don't fear the Reaper. I'm going to actually just look it up and then sing it back to you. The living daylights. Oh, woo! All right, I'm listening to it. Just give me a second. Here it is. Yeah, okay, it goes, the living daylights. That's it. I got there at the end. That's how it sounds. So yeah, I like it. I think it's an interesting song, and it was selected as like a chaser to Duran Duran's "A View to a Kill."
Well, that's the thing.
Like,
I
same
think
thing
it's
again.
It's the writings on the wall to "A View to a Kill's" Skyfall. It's it's just, that worked last time, let's do the same thing again. But one is clearly superior, although I don't necessarily agree in the case of Skyfall and Writings on the Wall. But I think that everything of The Living Daylights is trying to be A View to a Kill did better, and I think Duran Duran are a better band than Aha.
Okay. Well, there's also two other songs in the film. There's If There Was a Man, as well as Where Has Everybody Gone by Chrissy Hunday of The Pretenders. Hundy? If There Was a Man plays over the closing credits, and Where Has Everybody Gone is heard playing from one of the villains' Walkman several moments throughout the film. It's like, you hear it playing in the Walkman and you go, that's a song licensed for this movie. You know, that's not just a normal song that he's listening to. And the Pretenders were originally going to do the Living Daylights theme song as well, but because they wanted to replicate the success of Duran Duran, they went with Aha. So, License to Kill has License to Kill by Gladys Knight, which is the longest Bond song, out of any of them, and is heavily inspired by the Goldfinger theme. And I am not going to sing it, Richard, because I can't remember it. Can you remember it?
It goes, I got a license to kill, and you know, come for your heart.
Yeah. Oh, it's so 1989.
This one's fucking great.
That's such a 1989 sound, right?
Yeah, I love this. I mean, Gladys Knight is, one of the all-time great singers, second only to T-Pain. And
what the fuck? Is this a reference I don't understand?
It is. Comment if you get the reference.
What's the reference? I'm commenting.
I'm not going to say.
Tell me the reference.
I'm not going to say
Fuck
it.
you. Fuck you.
But yeah,
man.
I think this is a great song. This is another one of those ones that I'd heard before, but seeing in the context of the film and then listening to, much like The Man with the Golden Gun, which also these two songs are not on Spotify. Yeah, these like sort of ones that I rediscovered, and yeah, it's a banger.
I don't know if I agree.
It's
Only 'cause I don't remember it.
listening to the actual song, it is too long, but the chorus is fun.
Right. Well, as good as Gladys Knight is, apparently, someone whose name I didn't really recognize, but is apparently the greatest singer next to T-Pain, there was a version of License to Kill by Vic Flick and Eric Clapton, which was turned down inexplicably for being too gritty. But
is it the same song, or is it a different song called?
I think it's the same song.
Wow.
But it was too gritty. In your famously gritty James Bond film, and also in the closing credits, I think is a song called "If You Asked Me To" by Patti LaBelle, which again, like the extra songs in The Living Daylights, I do not remember. So there you go. Where do these sit in the pantheon of Bond songs for you?
I'm sorry, you're. I don't know that you're in the bottom half, but I find that song kind of forgettable, even though it's fun. And License to Kill, I think I would put it up there with what was my favorite Shirley Bassey theme song? I've forgotten it.
Diamonds Are Forever.
Yeah, Diamonds Are Forever. Yeah, I'd put them and maybe License to Kill just below Diamonds Are Forever.
Nice. Well, Richard, we're moving on to the final segment, or second to last segment of the show, and that is Continue the Franchise, where we confusingly try and continue a franchise that has been rebooted in a very specific way, which prevents it from being continued in any kind of significant or normal kind of way. So, with that all in mind, what's your Continue the Franchise?
So, my Continue the Franchise. So, have you seen the movie Galaxy Quest?
A long time ago.
So, Galaxy Quest is the story of this, the cast of this Star Trek-like show who end up having to defend Earth, and they have to become their characters because of this whole plot about people thinking that they're actually the person.
Aliens thinking that.
Yeah, aliens. Yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned that important plot point. But anyway, this isn't about Galaxy Quest. This is about my Continue the Franchise. So, as I mentioned before, I don't think that Timothy Dalton is really anybody's Bond. But I would like to do a film where you have some kind of deranged lunatic who's obsessed with spy movies, and for some reason specifically Timothy Dalton's Bond. So it'd have to be someone who is almost 50, but they would have been I'm going to say they turned 18 in 1990, so they came of age with these two films as the background to that. So I don't know, pick a 48-year-old actor, David Tennant. He's the bad guy in it, and he wants to have a real spy adventure, and with the only spy he knows, and that's Timothy Dalton. So he sets up this elaborate plan to force Timothy Dalton to battle him in a game of espionage. And the whole time, Timothy Dalton's like, I'm I'm Timothy Dalton. No one ever asks me to sign Bond things. I'm from Hot Fuzz and Looney Tunes back in action. Like, what are you doing? And then and so he gets forced, the actor Timothy Dalton gets forced into this game of espionage by a fanboy, and the whole time it's a commentary on, like, I've forgotten how to do this because I've forgotten how to pretend to do this because I never get asked about Bond, because who cares that I was Bond?
That's great, man. Does it have a title?
It's called Who Cares That I Was Bond?
I think even not to bring back up old content, but Nobody's Bond would be a cool title.
Yeah, actually, Nobody's Bond, yeah.
Because that can be his title bomb. I was Nobody's Bond. Is that a good Timothy Dalton impression?
Yeah.
I was nobody's. No, I was Nobody's Bond. That was a good Timothy Dalton. Come on.
It sounded Irish.
Where is he from? What is his
Where
accent?
is he?
Is it like North? It's like Northern English,
he's,
maybe?
Welsh, I think.
Oh, shit.
Although, to be fair, if you read Timothy Dalton's Wikipedia page, it says he is best known for portraying James Bond.
Yeah, but he's fucking not. He's not known for anything.
He's Simon Skinner.
Simon.
He runs the local supermarché.
Mr. Skinner.
Although, to be fair, okay, sorry, everything I've said on this episode about, like, everything's this way because of one person, because I feel this way because he's in Hot Fuzz, one movie that came out in prime movie viewing time for me. But, I'm sure if that fucking happened to you with The Living Daylights or License to Kill, you're listening to this thinking, what a fucking douchebag.
It's okay, Richard. Don't worry about it. You're fine.
Thank you.
All right,
okay,
shall I do my one now?
Yeah.
Okay, so my continue the franchise, I was thinking about the idea of a dark, gritty Bond and how that, with The Living Daylights, that's kind of the direction they wanted to take it post A View to a Kill. And I was like, well, what if they tried to take it in another direction, like the opposite direction? And that set me off on this crash course into this idea, which is called James Bond Babies. And similar to the Muppet Babies, or my version of the Muppet Babies, which was Baby Looney Tunes, this is an animated series, and it's set in a preschool where all the baby versions of the James Bonds hang out. And they go on little adventures and be little 2-year-old misogynists, and it's kind of cute. What do you think?
It's
That's
animated?
my whole idea. Yeah.
Nice. And get everyone to return for their voices.
And Roger Moore can be like, he hasn't learned to speak yet because we can't get him to return for it.
Yeah. Very cool.
All right. Well, that was a shit one, but hey, I can't always come up with a great one. So the last segment of the show is Rank That Franchise. We're going to rank The Living Daylights. We're going to rank The Living Daylights out of this franchise.
Very nice.
Please laugh. You're not. I can't. We've turned the video off because the internet wasn't working, and all I hear is this deathly silence after I say things. Okay, so we ranked. I feel like this should be ranked below, but pretty close to Live and Let Die. Right? Would you agree? Sorry, the Moore era. Yeah.
Okay.
So Live and Let Die is between Twilight and the Santa Claus.
Yeah, I don't know. Just chuck it next to it. I don't care where.
I actually kind of think you're right. I think it is right. It's better than the Santa Claus, but it's not. It just doesn't add up to what the Moore era did. So it's now ranked at number 44. It is the 44th best franchise we've seen on this podcast, and you can check out this list on our Letterboxd, which you'll find a link to in the show notes, along with links to all the other places you can contact Cole Popshire, or contact us. You can contact us if you want, or find us and subscribe and like to us on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and Twitter, and Acast and Apple Podcasts, and you can also email us at popculturemedia@gmail.com. You can join our Discord, all sorts of things. You can join our Patreon. Richard, do you have any final thoughts on Timothy Dalton's Bond?
He is very handsome.
Okay. Sick. Well, thank you for listening, everybody. And we'll see you next week. We're doing another Patreon suggested idea, so I'm sure it'll be as wacky as last week's. And then the week after that, we're going to be doing the 4 Pierce Brosnan films, because those are what's next in the series. Cool words, AJ. I have the best words. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, everybody. Please leave a comment, leave a like, and let us know which of the 2 Timothy Dalton movies is your favourite. All right.
Bye.
And stay tuned for the post credit scene after this musical outro. Thank you.
Yeah.
See you. Bye, everybody. Bye.
See you. Bye.
I apologise. This ending is rather abrupt, but so was Timothy Dalton's time as James Bond.
Very cool.
Cool. All right.
Oh
We're
my
in a
gosh.
post-credit
Right.
scene. You sound like shit.
Wait, slow down. We'll address that in a moment. Can we just talk about the ending of that episode?
What do you want to say?
Well, just that it was. I'm just feeling a whirlwind of emotions right now, and I think that
Yeah.
okay, my audio might not be as good as it normally is, but that's no excuse for some of those things you just said.
I stand by the things I said.
Nah.
All right. The reason you sound so shit is we thought we'd demonstrate just how much we value our Patreons, who this segment is dedicated to. This is our post-credit scene. Richard's in the middle of a road trip or some shit and had to record over his phone.
Yeah.
But we'll make this a short one. This is our post-credit scene. Every episode will end with this now, where our patrons can give us, if they're donating more than $5, can give us something to discuss in these final moments. And if you want to get in on this and get yourself
in our final moments.
Yeah. And if you want to get in on this and get yourself a post-credit scene of diminishing audio quality,
Yeah, that's going to get worse every episode.
yeah, you too can, and you will have just heard my Creative Cloud update, because this is just recording off my computer to capture Richard's audio. If you want to get in on this, you can donate at www.patreon.com/cultpopshow. Donate more than $5 and you will get your own post-credit scene. This episode, our post-credit scene comes from, let's go... Matthew Voss, or Vos, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. He says, "Hi chaps, I think my question would be, which film do you wish had sequels, or had just a sequel or sequels, so that you could cover it as a franchise?" That's a good question.
Yeah.
And this reminds me, Richard, do you remember back in season 1, we were wet behind the ears, we're just starting the podcast.
Yeah.
And after about 10 franchises or so, we were toying with the idea of changing the podcast, just for the sake of variety, to being about covering films that didn't have a sequel and pitching sequels to it. We very briefly considered pivoting to that just to have a different show going.
Yeah. Which
do
there's
you remember that?
more than one podcast already existing out there that does that.
Yeah,
however,
absolutely.
we're of course the only movie-related podcast.
Yeah. I'm glad we didn't, because it ended up being that learning about film franchises was much more interesting. But the movie that I did actually want to start the episode with, that new series with, was Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which never got any real kind of sequel. And I would have loved a Who Framed Roger Rabbit sequel. There's been talk of one happening for years. There was a prequel being planned, which was at one point called Who Discovered Roger Rabbit, and would have taken place in the golden age of cartoons. I thought that was a much better idea to the name it got changed to, which was like Toon Platoon, Roger Rabbit 2, or something like that. Which I think was shit, but I think Who Discovered Roger Rabbit would have been a cool prequel. Do you have any movies you wish had sequels so that we could cover as film franchises?
Well, the one that always pops up in like Reddit discussions of what film deserves a sequel, it's always District 9. But then that's not like I'm not interested to see where that goes as a franchise. I just want the conclusion of that story. Whereas there are movies like something like Walk Hard, one of my favorite movies, that I would love to see. Like, if you franchise that, what do you do with it? And so it's like, not only would it be a great chance to talk about that film, even though we have on our Patreon, I believe, but to just to see how you make a franchise out of that. Like, is it just other amazing parodies of like these specific genres of film, and that'll feature something like this Dewey. All of a sudden, we see like when he's jailed in his at some point in his career, and it becomes, we see a parody of like crime drama movies,
right?
But done the same style.
Yeah, nice. Well, I think that's a good answer. I think I'm trying to think of any others, but in the interest of not dragging this particular post-credit scene out too much longer.
There's also, the other one would be, which we talked about when we talked about pivoting the podcast, is Dude, Where's My Car? Because then you get Seriously, Dude, Where's My Car? Which was the sequel title they had. And then I would just love to see where they could beyond that with the titling scheme.
Yeah. Seriously, Dude, Where's My Car? And then, Dude, I'm Not Playing.
Yeah.
Where Is My Car? Yeah. I want to see more sequels to this purely because of the titling.
Yeah.